What's good, everyone, and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we are reacting to Game Theory Was I Wrong About Secret of the Mimic? Now, I was originally going to do the two Afton related videos. You know, the good and bad ending, bad paths. Uh, that is, well, uh, I accidentally listened to too much, and the thing in my and the recording system wasn't recording. So I essentially listened to one thing and heard it out, and you know, you know what? It's literally mentioned here, like I like it's literally mentioned in this video about both, and you'll understand the reason why. Because, so just listen to it, and then you'll understand something. Honestly, there was many things I was thinking, but those two just. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe. Hit the notification button to be notified immediately when the video comes out. If there's any videos you'd like to recommend that I should react to, put it down in the comment section below. I'll react to it as soon as possible. Other than that, link to this video is going to be down in the description below. So be sure to give Game Theory some love and support for the video that they made that I reacted to. Other than that, now let's get around into this video, shall we? This video...
Was I wrong about FNAF Secret of the Mimic? I spent months going over tiny details, analysing everything frame by frame, trying to solve this fascinating game. But I wasn't alone. There were two other theorists who brought their own solutions to problems I raised. So, are they right? Was I wrong? Let's find out. Hello Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that knows solving the FNAF lore is a team sport. It's been a couple of months now since we finished our Secret of the Mimic extravaganza, where we left off on a, let's call it, divisive branching path. I did my best to present a couple of options as to why we were seeing so many similarities between the characters of David Murray, David Afton, and Gregory, from their looks to their families, even the beats of their own stories. One option was that the M2 Mimic takes on the role of David Murray. Afton adopts him as his son, becoming David Afton, and then when he breaks M1, the AI that assumed the identity of David's mother Fiona decides to put him back together, creating Gregbot. Or there was the option that the first 7 games in the franchise weren't just in-universe games, but completely fictional, taking elements of David Murray's story and transforming it into a narrative about the Fazbear founder and his family in order to remove the Murrays from the picture. Like I said, two very different.
Yeah. And I listened to the good one first, and I'm gonna admit that I was puzzled by it, since it just didn't make that much sense to me. Because we got Michael Afton, we got Elizabeth Afton, and so on and so forth. And basically, it was confirmed that in the VR games that they had to take a lot of the stuff from the original games and try to play it off as something that was like a myth, just some rumors that we're just going to make fun of and all that. But yeah, if the first 7 games were complete BS, why are we here anymore? Plus, if that's going to be the case, then why is there so many references to a lot of stuff? Because without a doubt, there has to be a connection. Especially with the fact that we got a spring, well, not spring, well, Burn Trap. We got Burn Trap. And even though Burn Trap is possibly not canon, you gotta still think that, yeah, there was something going on there at the very least. Because, yeah, something was going on there. So, anyway, here we are with this, and I don't think that makes sense. And for, uh, like, oh, the, the, what's it called? I, the, the non, the non, frick, the, the bad side of everything. So basically, in the bad side of everything, it doesn't make too much sense either. Because, I don't know. Because that involves, like, a lot of other stuff, especially since we gotta consider the hospital and a large variety of things. And then that would mean that all the FNAF games that are connected to FNAF 4 are BS, and that doesn't seem like the case here. At most, uh, I mean, that it wouldn't make sense. It honestly wouldn't make sense. So, yeah, that would be the one thing to really say there. Because that would mean that the first 7 games are non-canon and a lot of other stuff. So, yeah, there's that. So, yeah, that's the big issue with that.
Paths,
So,
and not everyone likes them. Heck, I even pointed out their flaws in those videos. But I wanted to show them as options of how we could interpret the evidence. And since then, I've actually received a lot of comments asking me one very specific thing. Why wasn't I mentioning other people's theories? Especially when 2 of them were trying to answer the same question. Fate Fiona by Gibby's Horror Homestead and God David by T-Dreads. And the honest answer is, I hadn't watched them. I know that might be hard to believe. Us FNAF theorists usually want to take in as much FNAF content as possible, but as the amount of theorists has grown over the years, so has the rise in comments accusing theorists of stealing ideas from other people. So to make sure I wasn't in any way influenced by their theories, even subconsciously, I purposely avoided watching any other FNAF theories while I was working on my own. It's a shame, really, because at the end of the day, solving FNAF has always been about collaboration. It's why Matt did his live talk back after FNAF 4, and it's why we still do them today. We need to work together if we have any hope of getting through it. So, now that I've been out of my Secret of the Mimic hole for a few months, I figured it was high time I checked them both out to see whether they were able to fill in any of the gaps that I couldn't, or whether there's some combination of our ideas that could maybe make this story finally make sense. I hope you're ready, theorists, because it's time for another round of my trash takes.
Leave your theories in the comments or subreddit. I'll pick my favorite in the next episode of Trash.
Let's start with Gibby. As the name implies, Fate Fiona focuses on the character of Fiona Murray, David's mother. He posits that Fiona, after becoming the M1 mimic and put into the Mex's machine, becomes this overpowering force that manipulates the world around her into repeating history. Not just her history either, but Fazbear's history as a whole, like the fires, the bad fathers, the houses being on top of the secret facility, and loads more. This immediately caught my attention as it explores a similar line of thinking to what I was exploring in my Games Are Fiction branch. But it manages to keep it all in universe rather than it being a fictional story borrowing ideas from reality. Gibby suggests that Fiona is able to achieve this world manipulation through 3 main factors. Firstly, the idea that Fazbear keeps building on top of previous establishments, meaning all the remnant and agony of its victims are still present in the area and essentially haunting the building. This explains why in games like FNAF 1, we see the posters on the wall change, or why in Security Breach there are random plushies hidden around the place. It's the classic burial ground trope. The buildings are haunted because they are built upon the dead. But when you think about it, thanks to Secret of the Mimic and Ruin, who specifically is dead and underneath all of these buildings? Right in the basement of MCM, waiting to put her son back together, Fiona. Secondly, he looks at the story of Fetch from Fazbear Frights, and the concept of how human thoughts, if strong enough, can actually affect subatomic particles in order to manipulate the world around them and other people's thoughts. This is a real-world concept called the 0-point field. Gibby explains that down there in the basement, Fiona's thoughts are so strong, her desire to rebuild her family so powerful, that she is able to utilize the 0-point field and affect the thoughts of those in the area, namely William Afton, subconsciously planting the name David in his head so that he calls his own child David, as well as subconsciously giving him the idea to stuff kids into suits, like the Mimic used to do back in the 1970s. And finally, there's the physical wires. Fiona is plugged into everything Fazbear touches, much like the storyteller was in the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, an AI designed to connect to everything, but ends up infecting it with bad ideas and code. Similarly, Fiona gets plugged into Fazbear and so witnesses everything that happens throughout Fazbear's history due to the agony and remnant they leave behind, causing the technology to also repeat parts of history, like Fredbear killing David when the opportunity presents itself because her son David also died on the premises, or Glamrock Bonnie being locked away in a back room, destroyed, being watched by possessed wet floorbots, much like Springtrap was locked away in a back room after dying, being watched by 5 spirits. Fiona is the central hub for everything, with her memories and will being so strong, she's forcing history to repeat itself over and over again. Now, when I first watched this video, I thought it was super out there, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it tied into a number of theories we'd already had on this channel. We did a theory ages ago about why we thought there was so much puppet imagery across the Pizzaplex, specifically in the wires connecting everything. At the time, we felt the best option was leaning into the only character we knew that had an association with the puppet, Charlie. We even
You know, it's not the most craziest thing, believe it or not. I mean, FNAF did a lot of crazy things. To be honest, this is actually a lot more tame. Like, it is a lot more tame than one would expect if it was true. Because, let's be honest, this kind of thing is, as I said repeatedly, is very tame. It doesn't really give off something that's too crazy, or like Fazgoo, and it is something to really actually think about. The only thing I could really say that makes this thing mute is the fact that the Fiona is technically AI and is from basically the Mimic 1. Other than that, it does make sense in a degree. I mean, we have literally, for the first 7 games, it was basically children possessing animatronics and them, like, haunting them and using them in ways beyond one's understanding through the methods of remnant and agony. So, yeah, and if some of the books are to be believed, especially when we consider, if I remember correctly from my time of playing Security Breach and Ruin, there were many hints that gave off the books. So that means that some of the book stuff is connected, like the animatronics. One being Fetch, since I remember there being a game that had Fetch on the cover of it, and there was a game that featured fetch. So if it is following the loop of making jokes of something that was bad about the product, then that makes sense. And if the stuff from fetch is correct, then that means the mind thing is true. Again, the only thing that I see that can really make this like not like directly 100% true is the fact that, again, Fiona was technically, from the sounds of it, it's connected to the original M1. So unless somehow the human Fiona actually possessed the circuit boards and all that of M1, then honestly, it doesn't really work. But it does sound, if you take that out of perspective, it actually does sound like it could fit.
And equated it to the idea that she was haunting the building like an old school ancient burial ground, rather than being tied to a specific animatronic like we'd usually see. We had the same idea, it's just we didn't know Fiona was a character in order to tie her to all the puppet imagery instead of Charlie. Admittedly, it may still seem a little strange. Why would Fiona be associated with the puppets? Well, I think we can come up with a good explanation for it. Let's just remove the mask and... Matt, what are you doing here? Oh, wait, it's because Creators in Fashion is coming back for a second year, right? And you're gonna be the MC. And that's not all. We've got Linus Tech Tips, the Try Guys, and loads more creators all there to show the world that just because we're creators doesn't mean we just create, quote,
Okay.
out our sister location style theory on October 9th, thanks to the amount of one of our mimics on so that thanks for reminding me, Matt. Now let's just put this back on so that I can tell you all why the puppet makes sense. In another one of our mimic theories, I suggested that M1 Fiona's memories are becoming muddied thanks to the amount of data she's received from the original games while being used to make Help Wanted. But while I focused solely on what she'd have learnt from Afton in order to make her glitch trap, there are other characters in those games she'd have learnt about and possibly even adopted as part of this new messy persona. Characters like Charlie. I specifically called out that she seems to be adopting traits from characters that she identifies with. Afton is a man that wants to put his family back together no matter the cost, for example. But Fiona and the puppet share a couple of close connections too. They're both protectors of children, they both fail at their duty and the child dies on their watch. Fiona is also a puppeteer, so again, she has an association with puppets. And these similarities all add to M1 Fiona being a confused mess. She can't tell what is her and what is someone else. Is it Glitchtrap? Is it Charlie? Is it David? But that could be why we see all these things connecting the Pizzaplex giving off puppet vibes, even though it's supposed to be Fiona and not Charlie. On the flip side, if you subscribe to Gibby's theory wholesale, it wouldn't just be data, but all the agony and remnant and memories of all the victims who died on this one piece of Fazbear land entering Fiona's system, meaning Charlie's memories are now part of Fiona too. But that also brings up the part of the theory that is possibly one of the biggest debates coming out of Secret of the Mimic. Is there possession, or is it just AI? For this theory to work, it requires you to be of the belief that the M1 Mimic program didn't just become Fiona through being an AI, but through possession, using the classic old school FNAF tools of things like Remnant and Agony. Two of the reasons I've seen for M1 being possessed are that she learned to be Fiona after Fiona had died, and that Edwin uses the frequency 4625 on one of the audio logs and hears the voice of Fiona after her death. This frequency is actually associated with a ghost radio frequency in the real world, known as the buzzer. As the name implies, it simply broadcasts a static buzz across the airwaves, but occasionally you can hear words, sometimes even voices in the background. But the key thing is, no one claims to be running it, leading some to believe it's ghosts speaking from beyond the grave. However, upon looking into it more, it seems that this radio frequency is something more to do with Russian intelligence, with two other radio stations, the Pip and the Squeaky Wheel, also transmitting a similar signature sound, occasionally interrupted by coded Russian voice messages. It's real messages being sent by real people, not ghosts, which means that if Steel Wool is invoking the iconography of frequency 4625, they're telling us, while it may appear to be something paranormal, it's actually a real person, or at least thing, that's sending the message. John FNAF has a great theory about how it's actually the mycelium men who have recorded Fiona trying to help Edwin, because the AI Edwin made in all of his inventions was designed to
know what you want better than you do.
which also explains how M1 learns to be Fiona. It's not from Fiona herself, but from the recordings of her through the mycelium men, which is why she acts like her, but she feels more stilted and robotic.
I baked it myself for David's special day.
And no, it's not just because she's a robot, but because she never learnt from the real thing. Plus, as I've mentioned before, Scott does seem to be moving away from the old paranormal stories he used to tell.
I have a tendency to lean sci-fi, so anything that involves possession of AI or possession of machines or circuitry, I love that sort of thing.
Since Help Wanted, we've been getting stories about AI taking over people, not Remnant or Agony. In the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, while we still get ghost stories, we don't really get much in the way of Remnant or Agony specifically. There's Frailty, where a girl has a Remnant necklace similar to the one from To Be Beautiful in Fazbear Fright, but it's rarely the focal point of this series. Again, emphasizing the move away from those old FNAF story beats and more into AI and machine sentience. And without the real spirit of Fiona, it means there's no Remnant or Agony, and it becomes harder to explain things like the 0-point field. That's not to say it's impossible by any stretch. There are signs of some paranormal things going.
So, if I'm paying attention to this really well, and I'm hoping I am, it means that basically it is impossible for Fiona to be part of it because, well, Fiona didn't really have that much of a clear connection or anything like that to involve possession. It could be that while trying to mimic Fiona, the psyche of Fiona and trying to make it perfect was strong enough for that Fiona personality to gain its own consciousness. But that still wouldn't make sense, I guess. But it does explain what to expect more now. When it comes to anything related to William Afton, it's going to involve Remnant and Agony. It's going to involve spirit possession and so on and so forth. Well, this new era FNAF, starting from I think like the mobile games actually, now that I think about it. Because technically, wouldn't that be the first one? That is a tricky question, actually. Was it that game or the other one? I can't really tell, in all honesty. I would have to actually look into that. That would mean... So, was it Help Wanted? Or the AR game? Forget. I don't know. But it does tell us by that point, we're away from that kind of thing involving possession and all that, since the main person to do the whole possession thing is, well, not there anymore. So it's more following an AI kind of system.
On at MCM. I mean, the white tiger costume feels very much like old school Golden Freddy. That, or it's just Arnold hallucinating.
Just
finished a 36-hour shift and am struggling to stay awake.
And the 0 point field idea comes from the story Fetch, and the Into the Pit game did tease a Fetch sequel, so maybe they are gonna bring it in. And the fact is, if it turns out to be true, Faye Fiona would help to justify my theory that Old Man Consequences is actually what remains of Edwin Murray. I suggested that because Edwin from the books comes back to help destroy the Mimic years later, that even though it seems like he died at the end of Secret of the Mimic, in reality, he didn't fully die, because no one ever dies in this series. I suggested that the king in Princess Quest, known as Old Man Consequences in the game files, was like Edwin's digital signature, a safety protocol inside the Mimic's programming designed as a failsafe to stop the monster he'd created. Fate Fiona also ties into this theory, just in a more classic FNAF way. Rather than Edwin leaving behind a digital signature, it's literally his agony and spirit that, like everything else, ended up inside Fiona's systems, which then plugged into all the arcade cabinets in the Pizzaplex, which then allowed him to appear in games like Princess Quest and even FNAF World. So while I'm not entirely sure about the method this theory is based on, I do have to say it helps explain a lot of our past theories, as well as a dozen other theories from across the internet. I also understand that it would be nice to have things like Remnant and Agony still feel like they're important today and not just a forgotten story device. But at the very least, Gibby and I can agree that, one way or another, Fiona is definitely the one running the show here. But that's just one of the branching paths, and if you're enjoying this kind of branching path theory review thing that we're doing here, you should absolutely consider subscribing. Maybe you can hit the button before Fiona sets the Mimic on you. Probably got about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nice work. Huh, it didn't shut her down though. Ah! Whew! Anyway, the second and probably most requested theory for me to look at is called God David by T-Dreads. The reason this one came as so requested is because it actually has a lot of similarities to the other branching paths I presented. The reason David Murray, David Afton, and Gregory have so many similarities can't be coincidence, they must be the same person. However, rather than it being a bunch of robot kids, T-Dreads takes a slightly different approach. He focuses a lot on Gregory, pointing out a lot of the same similarities I did. Similar appearance, both being called Broken, sitting on a hill with their robotic protector, but the one extra piece he points out is the therapy CDs from Security Breach. These recordings are from therapy sessions with two different patients. One is Vanessa, with her being named in the tapes, and one is a mysterious unnamed patient, who we all came to call Patient 46. We theorized early on in the life of Security Breach that Patient 46 was in fact Gregory. This was later seemingly confirmed thanks to the story GGY, where we see a kid called Greg killing off these counselors when they got too close to the truth. The truth that Gregory wasn't really himself anymore, but being controlled by someone else. T-Dreads points out that multiple therapists call him out for making up stories, that he's lying about his past, almost like an AI reading from a script.
The way you told the story is more like you were reading something from a book.
But rather than it being because Gregory is a robot, it's because he's possessed by a version of M2's programming, a version of David Murray. He points specifically to the Balloon World arcade cabinet in Gregory's hidey hole, the one which, as you play, begins to glitch out and become corrupted, ending with the words "good night," as if Gregory is going to sleep and allowing M2 to take control. That's why when the therapists say lines like,
"You had great parents,"
it's because Gregory is telling the story of David's parents, not his own. Edwin definitely wasn't in the running for Father of the Year, and both Edwin and Fiona met tragic ends. But that wasn't true for Gregory's parents. I gotta say, I'm a fan of this. Even in my video where I brought up Gregory being a robot kid, I said I wasn't in love with the idea of having more robot kids around. It meant that we had M1, M2, now what, M3? It's just a lot of robot kids and not enough real people. And this use of the therapy CDs actually helps move away from that. A robot kid made inside the Pizzaplex by M1 Fiona and Vanessa wouldn't have physical records or files for the therapists to refer to. They wouldn't be able to say lines like, "You had great parents," because he'd be an anomaly with no past. He literally just showed up one day. But if instead he's a real kid with his mind taken over, then he would have real records that might even explain why he ended up in therapy, because his teachers noticed he suddenly started acting differently. From there, he starts acting like and dressing like a slightly older version of David Murray, just like M1 wanted, only for him to be set free sometime before Security Breach. The only thing...
So it's like Vanessa in a way, like how she got possessed, and the fact that when we look into the whole details involving the Vanny mask, it had unique features to it that just stood out. So, that's actually really interesting. Because this leads to a whole lot of other details to really think about. But is it true? Hard to say, really. But it does make sense in this case. If Gregory wasn't a robot child, but was something else, like a real person with real records, but instead of having the robot child thing, he had implants into his head, and that led to, that's really interesting. It does make
thing I
sense
would
in a way.
question about this idea is the specifics of exactly what is possessing Gregory. T-Dreads presents it as a version of the Mimic program that contains David's memories, which would seem to imply M2. He uses Balloon World's glitched sun as evidence for this. The character looks a lot like Eclipse, which is a character that represents the collaboration between Fiona, Sun, and Edwin's Moon. And so that shows us that David, or M2, is taking over Gregory's mind. But just like in my previous theories, there are a few ways you could interpret this, and mine would be slightly different in this case. So far, there's been one AI that clearly has the ability to take over people's minds. Glitchtrap. We saw it with Jeremy, who sadly sliced his face off, and with Vanessa, who mentions that in the therapy tapes there's part of her that is locked away. In many of our previous theories, we've connected Glitchtrap back to the M1 Fiona program, who, after being used to make games like Help Wanted, became muddled and confused as to what her true identity was. M1 Fiona is also represented by Sun, as we see in both the parachute ending of Secret of the Mimic and during Moon.exe. So when we see the sun glitched out in Balloon World, it's possible it's not showing us Eclipse, but simply a glitched out sun. It's sun that itself has been corrupted by the memory and influence of Afton, becoming a glitched trap for Gregory. So if we have an AI program that can take control of human minds, that human can also have an internal dialogue with, and it's the same one already taking over the entire Pizzaplex, it makes the most sense for Gregory to also be taken over by that same entity, rather than having a bunch of different mimic AIs all existing at the same time. Otherwise you end up with the same problem that I had with my own Gregbot theory, where it's just so many of one thing, robot kids or AI, and it becomes so complicated that it's just not satisfying anymore. It's Occam's razor. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right solution. It being an AI, M1, wouldn't actually change the fact that Gregory has been mind controlled in order to make him a new David either. After all, M2 was a copy of M1's programming, and we theorize that M2 was originally being taught on how to be David through Moon.exe, essentially using the memories M1 had of David to help recreate him. It's just doing the same thing in Gregory's head. It would also tie more into Gregory's persona that we see in GGY, where he takes on the moniker of Dr. Rabbit, which feels more connected to Glitchtrap than to M2 specifically. Plus, Gregory is shown to be hacking the animatronics in that story, which again is not something we'd necessarily expect of David Murray, but would make sense for someone infected by Glitchtrap, who's trying to take control in order to make their vision a reality. But that's just one part of that theory. The second half focuses on the similarities between David Murray and David Afton. T-Dreads once again does his due diligence and not only calls out the same things that I did, but adds a bunch more. Like the fact David Afton's favourite ride is the carousel according to the security logbook, but there isn't a carousel in Fredbear's. There is a carousel, however, in Murray's costume manor, almost as if he's remembering a different child's memories. There's also the line, "Do you miss them?" in the logbook, right next to a picture of Foxy writing a note. And in Moon.exe, there is a note asking the moon to bring back the sun, because he misses them. Again, it makes it hard to deny there's a connection here. The challenge becomes the how of it all. Even T-Dreads admits that this part is a bit of a stretch because we just don't have enough evidence yet, but he presents the idea that psychic friend Fredbear actually contains a version of the M2 David AI, which William uses to swap the mind of his son with David Murray. We see the mycelium men who contain mimic technology have the same black eyes with white dots. Glitchtrap resides in a spring Bonnie plush in order to swap minds with Vanessa, and this particular story structure is repeated all over the books, like the week before, Into the Pit, Gumdrop Angel, The Monty Within, but most most prominently for this theory in a story called Lonely Freddy. A small Freddy asks a child questions to learn more about them in order to assume their identity, eventually swapping bodies with them. Ironically, this is almost identical to a theory we had many years ago. It's just now we understand why.
Okay, I get it. But there could be another possible reason. M2 tried to do the swap, but it didn't go out successfully, which led to a broken David Afton. That might be the case.
M1 Fiona needs an animatronic genius like Edwin, and now, like Afton, to be able to rebuild her son. Afton is intrigued by these machines that feel alive, and so is willing to go along and plan so that he can study it. All of that makes so much sense, and again, lines up with the same motivations I presented. The main challenge I had with it was the timeline. In our original theory, and also in T-Dread's theory, it presents the questions that psychic friend Fredbear / the Lonely Freddy is asking are so it can learn stuff about David in order to steal his body and become David Murray once again. Except by the time we see him in the FNAF 4 minigames, he's already exhibiting signs that he is David Murray. He's wearing the same clothes, carrying the plushie around, he's scared of Foxy, has the same name. I suppose you could argue that these things are just things William conditioned him to do in order to make him susceptible to the mind transfer. But then, when does he take over? Is it after he gets bit, when he says, "I'll put you back together"? But then what happens to him after that? Why does he disappear from the story? And if it's before that moment, then it means Fredbear wouldn't have any need to ask those questions or be the M2 AI because he's already taken over David Afton's mind. Now, all of that being said, I do recognize that there's definitely evidence for the crying child being more like a human child than a robot one like I presented originally. After all, the key evidence that T-Dreads refers to, the security logbook, has two spirits talking to one another, the vengeful spirit Cassidy and the spirit of David. If the Fredbear plush was the M2 David Murray program, then David Afton's spirit would be present and able to attach itself to Fredbear in order to take control and then talk to Cassidy. Plus, in the logbook, we see David struggling with his memories, hence all the questions about favorite toys, rides, and even his name. Cassidy is trying to help him remember, maybe because his own memories have been suppressed for so long by M2, much like with Gregory and the therapy CDs, although we don't ever get the last name from that spirit. So I suppose there is a chance that this is really David Murray's spirit, trying to remember itself after years of wandering, kind of like we see happen to Jake in the Stitch Wraith stories. I mean, Cassidy is calling out that his favorite ride is the carousel, which, as T-Dreads points out, the crying child, David, wouldn't have ever witnessed. But we know that David Murray did. And all of this can be happening while M2 is walking around dressed like David Murray, now under the watchful eye of William Afton. And see, this is why I did the branching paths in that original theory to begin with, because it's important to explore all of the options. And I'm so glad to see other theorists exploring alternative ideas from the same evidence, while bringing up new points that agree, but also counter my own. Every theory has its strengths and weaknesses, but just because we don't like one part of the theory doesn't mean we have to throw the animatronic baby out with the bathwater. I love the evidence surrounding Gregory's possession by the Mimic. We may differ on the specifics, but it solves one of the big problems I had with the Gregbot theory. Even if I don't believe that M1 is physically possessed by Fiona, it doesn't mean that I can't use parts of that theory to fill the gaps that I had with characters like Old Man Consequences or the Puppets. And I hope that both Gibby and T-Dreads are able to take some of the additions or counters that I've made and run with them to help develop their theories even further. The point is, by exploring all of the options, we can get a better sense of what's really going on. So let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think the answer is one of these alternative branching paths, or do you think it's some combination of them? All I ask is that you remember to be kind and patient with one another, because at the end of the day, it's all just a theory.
In all honesty, I believe it might be more of a combination. All the more possible parts, such as the implants and whatnot. Like I've mentioned, in Ruin, Cassie has something injected into her. Wow, that actually sounds wrong. The mask had needles or something like that, And when she put it on her face, it put something under skin and the skin and all that into uh into her into the face part of her body. Wow, that sounds so cringe. I try to make it sound like something more sensible without having some uh kind of word setting that just would sound wrong. I just effed it up. Basically, she wore the mask, and implants were inputted into her body. So it wouldn't be that far hard to believe that Gregory ended up getting that kind of thing implemented into him. And if he is a human boy with these implants, then that means something else. Honestly, the only way we're gonna know for sure is when we get back to the present timeline of FNAF and not the past. Honestly, we need a Fall Fest. We need to know what went on in the Fall Fest. Because something happened, it's just that we don't know the specifics. But a lot of the stuff from the negative path, when it comes to Fazbear's, it does give that kind of feeling. Not gonna lie. But a thing I can say about the whole connection between the two Daves or slash Davids and Gregory, well, if we're gonna count every answer, every possibility, well, here's one that also can't be denied, and it's quite simple. It's just that they both have the same name. Like, don't get me wrong, it sounds like the most boring name ever. But here's some things to really say about it. Like, for one, we don't actually know what in-game William looks like. We don't know what in-game Miss Afton looks like. We know that their features and characteristics come from their children, though, and with how Elizabeth is, it's more likely she got her features from Mrs. Afton. Well, William got more of his features showed more from Michael uh, and David. So there could be a possibility that William and or Mrs. Afton could be related to Fiona and or Edwin. I mean, that is a possibility. Because, remember, well, I'm going to point this out, but there could be a connection through that. But though it seems like William doesn't really share any familial relationships with Edwin or Edwin's father. So it could be possible that he could be a cousin of Fiona, in all honesty. Because if it is admitted that the two David slash Daves share enough features to be similar, then it could not. It could be a genetic thing, not really something else. I mean, I'm gonna admit that it sounds far-fetched, but it is a possibility. I mean, the only William Aftons we know, feature-wise, is from the movies and from the Silver Eyes to Fourth Closet. Really, we don't have an image of what he looks like in the games. He could look different in games. I mean, I'm pretty sure we got a clear image of what Henry looks like in general, so yeah. And if what he looks like from the books is what he looks like in the game, I don't know. If it is, then that just means that him and Fiona probably share enough features, or Mrs. Afton just is a distant relative of Fiona. Like, I don't know. Miss Afton is literally the one character we have no idea about. And until we actually get like an idea of who she looks like, then the possibility that her and Fiona be related, or Fiona and what King William looks like, could lead to the fact that she's like a cousin related to either one of them. So yeah, the possibility is there, but that's really my point when it comes to the connection between both David's and slash Dave's. For Gregory, it could be an implant, and it has some of the M2 kind of things, and while trying to possess Gregory, Gregory just gained some of M2's AI thing. So that is a possibility. Now that I'm saying it, it doesn't sound impossible, really. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, hit the like button below, hit the subscribe button to support the channel, support the content provided, and so on and so forth. Hit the notification button, be notified immediately when your video comes out. And with all this said, I'll see y'all next time. Bye.